Hello world, my name is Leo and today I will be giving my thoughts and theories so far on Deltarune. Specifically, I want to talk about how Deltarune portrays the concept and theme of choice and how that might tell us where the story is going to go in the future. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm currently playing through Deltarune on the channel. There will be a link to my Let's Play down below. I just finished Chapter 1, and all of my thoughts and theories will be based on that. I haven't started any of the other chapters, so please avoid putting any spoilers in the comments, and without further ado, let's get into it. So, one of the things that really struck me early on about Deltarune was that it seemed conflicted with regards to how it wanted to portray choice, at least on the surface. Right away, at the very beginning of Chapter 1, the game makes a big show of letting the player design their own character. You're able to pick body parts and random attributes and stuff like that, only to have the mysterious narrator tell you that, quote, no one can choose who they are in this world, unquote. And all of your choices are discarded, and you are made to become a character named Chris. And then later on, when you meet the character Susie, she straight up tells you, in a sentence that feels very much meant for the player, quote, if you haven't gotten it by now, your choices don't matter, unquote. But then, when we actually get into the game proper, and we find the other world, we are told by Ralsei that we can choose between being aggressive or being kind towards the enemies we meet, and we encounter a very similar combat system to the one from Undertale. You can fight or you can act, you can kill enemies or you can spare them, and seemingly, NPCs will treat you more favorably if you are kind to them. So I saw this and I was like, what's really going on here? What is Deltarune trying to say about the theme of choice? And where could this story be going? If our choices really don't matter, then what is the point of letting us choose to spare or kill? Thinking about this, it made me realize that Deltarune seems to actually be portraying choice in two very similar but distinct ways. Again, let's go back to those two quotes. No one can choose who they are in this world, and your choices don't matter. No one can choose, and your choices don't matter are two different things. One implies that there is a choice, and the other implies that there isn't. And in order to break down what those mean, we have to make the distinction between agency and inevitability, the two things that I think Deltarune is going for here. So let's start with agency. The term agency in this context refers to someone's own ability to make choices in the first place. It's a theme that often comes up in gaming through the lens of open-world RPGs, as in how much agency or how much player freedom does a game offer. In linear games, you usually don't have very much agency, and in open-world games, you have a lot of agency because there's a lot of routes that the player can take. Now, when it comes to the theme of lack of agency, it's typically used as a way to make the player feel uncomfortable, giving the player a sense of control throughout the whole game, only to suddenly take it away. And I think two really good examples of the theme of lack of agency in games are The Last of Us and Doki Doki Literature Club. There are definitely more, and maybe there are better ones, but these are the two that came to mind when I started thinking of this theme. For The Last of Us, spoilers for The Last of Us by the way, if you want to skip this, there'll be a timestamp on screen. Joel kills a lot of fireflies in order to save Ellie. The fireflies have Ellie, they are going to kill her to try to find a cure for the fungal infection that has decimated humanity, and Joel decides to save her, and basically dooms humanity, and wipes out a massive chunk of the fireflies in order to do it. And I remember when The Last of Us first came out, there was a lot of debate over whether or not Naughty Dog should have let the player make the choice in that moment, whether to save Ellie or not. And Naughty Dog said that in the end, they didn't want the player to have that choice because they were playing as Joel. In that moment, it wasn't about what the player would do, it was about what Joel would do. In that moment, even though I don't know if it was necessarily intentional, the game made the player feel that lack of agency as they were forced as Joel to kill all of these people for the sake of someone that they themselves might not have chosen to save. And then moving on to Doki Doki Literature Club, again, spoilers for Doki Doki, there will be a timestamp if you want to skip this part. Doki Doki's way of handling agency is in a much more mechanical sense. The entire game is presented as a visual novel with multiple paths, but you learn by the end of the game that all of your choices that you have made, whether or not you say I love you to Sayori, whoever you choose to spend the weekend with before the festival, all of those choices don't matter, and they're all just kind of an illusion. The game is actually extremely linear, and especially in the second half of the game, Monica is actively fighting you and the game in order to create her own singular path for herself and funnel you down it, and in the process, robbing you as the player of your agency, of your ability to make your own choices. Now, whether or not you would have wanted to romance Monica or follow Monica down that path is a whole nother thing entirely. The point is, in the game, you didn't have a choice in the matter. And so, in Deltarune, that mostly, I would say, presents itself at the beginning, ironically in the two quotes that I mentioned earlier in the video, but also during the fight with the king and at the very end. At the beginning, when the mysterious narrator says, "No one can choose who they are in this world," and then says, "Your name is Chris," it's not really that your choices didn't matter, even though they didn't. It wasn't because you would have gotten the same outcome regardless of what you chose. It was because your choices were being discarded by a third party and you were forced into this one option. Chris wasn't given to us as a vessel, as an organic part of the story. Chris was forced upon us by this mysterious narrator, and we were forced upon Chris. During the Susie interaction, when Susie says, "You're going to do the project, how does that sound?" And then we're presented with a good or bad, and then she immediately interrupts us and says, "Your choices don't matter." It's very ironic that that line was placed there, because in that moment, we weren't actually given a choice. It's not like we chose good or bad and we would have gotten the same outcome either way. Instead, Susie just chose to skip that part, took the choice away from us, and then said, "Your choices don't matter." But then, let's step away from those two moments, because we've talked enough about those, and let's talk about the fight with the king and the end. During the fight with the king, it's made very clear that he is not someone who can be reasoned with. Despite going in with the intention of not hurting him, that choice is taken away from us when all of our choices under the act category turn into offensive and defensive moves. It led to a lot of confusion on my part during my Let's Play to see what appeared to be a damage-dealing attack under the acting category, and it made me wonder whether or not the game was trying to trick me into attacking when I didn't want to. Eventually, however, I came to the conclusion that the game wasn't trying to trick me into attacking, it was forcing me to attack. And even Ralsei was forced after the fight to admit that maybe not every fight can be won without us hurting the other person. In that fight, the king forced my hand, and I didn't have a choice but to attack in order to win that fight. Moving on from that to the very end of the chapter. When Chris rips their soul, in other words, us, from their body, it very much seemed to me like Chris was rebelling against us. Like I said before, we were forced on Chris and took them over as our vessel. And Chris, it seems, is very much still in there. And Chris is their own person. Chris has a past. You can tell from the way everyone talks about them as they go throughout town and as you talk to all of the NPCs like Noel and Sans and Asgore. Chris is a character who has already interacted with these people, and these people know Chris as a very specific type of person. But now that we've taken them over, everyone's saying that they're acting a little bit strange, that they've grown up quite a bit. We're also able to bring up references from Undertale to these characters who don't know what we're talking about. And Chris also probably wouldn't know what we're talking about because in that moment we're acting on player knowledge. So at the end, when Chris rips us out of their body, that is them trying to get their agency back. The whole entire game, we have had control of them. Chris has had no agency, and by throwing us in the cage, Chris is trying to rob us of our agency. And so there's this back and forth going on of who has agency and who doesn't. Who has the ability to make choices? I mean, to name another example regarding Susie, she starts out rebellious in every battle, attacking enemies against our will. But then, after her confrontation with Lancer, she allows us to take control of her character and give her orders. Ironically, when she wasn't following us and just choosing to fight, that was her exhibiting her agency. She was making her own choices. But then later, even though she's technically making the choice to follow us, she is essentially signing away her agency because now we're making her choices for her. So I can definitely see Deltarune making this theme prominent from both a storytelling standpoint and a mechanical standpoint, where there will be moments when the player or other characters are able to exhibit agency, are able to even have the ability to choose at the expense of someone else. And before I get into what that could mean for where the story goes, I want to move on and talk about the second theme of choice, inevitability. Inevitability is referring to the idea that no matter what choices you make, you will get the same outcome. It's a very typical existential theme, and a lot of games tackling existentialism will use some kind of inevitability or predetermined event as a story component to make that feel very real. The monolith ticking down to zero in Expedition 33. The supernova destroying the galaxy in Outer Wilds. In games that have these elements and themes like this, the character often asks, and the player is often forced to reckon with, what is the point of making choices? What is the point of doing anything if it's all going to lead to the same thing? And it's not just end of the world kind of stuff. It's also when there's a power imbalance and someone has more power than another person. In any game where you are playing the little guy against someone with massive amounts of power, no matter what you do, there could be events where you will find yourself on the back foot because that entity has more sway over the events that take place. And the game that I really want to reference here when talking about the theme of inevitability, in comparison to how I think Deltarune might do it, is the Red Strings Club. Now again, I want to put a spoiler warning here. I'm going to be spoiling a lot of what this game depicts in terms of its themes, and there will be a timestamp if you want to skip it. I will also say that the Red Strings Club is a brilliant, underrated gem in my opinion. I played it on the channel as well, and I love the way it depicts choice. But at the same time, it is not for kids. The things that it depicts and talks about are very mature and very adult themes. So I just want to put out that warning in case you decide to look into it for yourself, because I know Deltarune has a lot of younger people in its fan base. It is not for kids, but what it does brilliantly in my opinion. So to set up the Red Strings Club, it takes place in a cyberpunk dystopian future, and it centers on 3 people: Brandeis, Akara, and Donovan. Brandeis is a hacker, Akara is an AI helper robot, and Donovan is a bartender. and he's actually the character that you play as the most over the course of the game. Donovan has the ability to manipulate people's emotions through the drinks that he serves. That becomes a really important mechanic because the whole point of the game is to try to gather information to try to stop a super corporation from enacting a project that will essentially allow them to bend society to their will. And in this game, the choices that you make do feel like they matter. Depending on the emotion that you make a person feel, combined with the question that you ask them, you might get the info that you're looking for, or you might get really useless info that you can't use. Depending on how certain events go, you might have people who are willing to help you, or that help might not be available as an option. However, there's a twist to all of this that I haven't said yet. The game opens with showing you how it ends. Brandeis, the hacker, falling to his death from the top of the corporate tower. After you see that, the game flashes back to how events led up to that point, and that's where you start trying to gather info and stuff like that. And in the game, there is a menu called the Red Strings menu, where you can see all of the different nodes where the red strings can connect to each other. And you can tell that there are multiple ways the strings can go in terms of whether or not you're successful at certain things, whether or not you're able to uncover certain pieces of information. But if you scroll all the way to the end of the menu, it ends with Brandeis falling from the top of the tower. No matter where the red strings go, no matter what choices you make, you cannot change that ending. And the main twist at the very end is that you were actually being manipulated the whole time by someone who has the ability to pull the strings of the masses. Someone wanted you to sabotage this project, and they slowly led you to it in such a natural way that you didn't suspect a thing. When you meet this entity at the very end, they say that they see society as, quote, a game that they can never master, end quote, and they enjoy pushing society in different directions just to see what will happen. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, how could your choices in the Red Strings Club have mattered if the ending was the same no matter what, and it turns out you were being manipulated? Well, in the end, your choices might not have mattered, but in the moment, it really felt like they did. Deconstruct Team, the devs behind the Red Strings Club, did a fantastic job of making the choices feel real and like they had weight, and that there would be consequences for your actions if you didn't succeed. Indeed, something that the entity at the end says is that Donovan is able to manipulate fate on a microscopic scale. And that's kinda what I want to draw back to in Deltarune. By giving you the choice to either fight or act, and by having the NPCs reference your actions, Deltarune is making you feel like your choices matter in the moment, even though the game is explicitly telling you otherwise, and even though the Steam page says that there is only one ending. Much like Donovan in the Red Strings Club, it appears that you are able to manipulate fate, or at the very least, people's perception of you, on a microscopic scale, which is ironic considering that the story setup is that you're there to fulfill a grand prophecy and save the world. So, in this sense, I could see Deltarune playing with that idea, that your choices don't matter in the grand scheme of things, but they do matter to you and the people around you. Speaking of the story, let's now bring these two themes together, agency and inevitability, and talk about where Deltarune could take both of these themes, and what Deltarune will say about the meaning and power of choice as a whole. First, what could the inevitable one ending be that is apparently set in stone? Well, both the shopkeeper Sham and the secret boss Jevel seem to hint at the fact that there's something wrong with the world, with Sham even hinting that the end of the world is coming. Granted, we are here to save the world, But I think it's a very real possibility that we'll be confronted with the fact that we might not be able to save the world, and that all of the people we spared and all of the work we did will have been for nothing in the long run. But those choices would still matter in the moment because you, as the player, care about these characters and how they perceive you. But possibly the more interesting question is, how does the theme of lack of agency fit into that story framework? Well, I think we see that answer at the very end of Chapter 1. Chris seems to be desperate to gain their agency back at our expense, and their intentions don't seem particularly friendly. I predict that there could be a battle coming, primarily between the player and Chris, but involving all the other characters as well, over who has agency and who doesn't. At the end of the world, who will have the ability to make the choices that need to be made, and who will lose their ability to make choices, period. Some people, even when facing the end, will want to hold on to as much power and control as they possibly can. And let's take this even further. Deltarune is already hinting at there being meta elements in this game. The mysterious narrator talks directly to the player at the beginning. Chris seems to look back at the screen with the knife after they rip us out of their body. There's also Jevil, who seems to have come to some kind of meta realization that the world is just a game. So, leaning into those meta elements even more, what if Chris has had that same meta awakening? What if they are actually here to make sure the story stays on track and reaches that inevitable ending at the end of the world? Or, like Monica in Doki Doki, what if they are here to cut their own path through the game by any means necessary towards an ending that they alone can shape? Either way, the result is the same: a battle between Chris and the player over the power of choice, or to put it in a term that fits the universe of Undertale more, the power of self-determination. And I know that this might leave the possibility open for two endings, but at the end of the day, the end of the world is still the end of the world. And so maybe regardless of what happens, the only things that will change based on your choices will be which characters will be by your side to watch everything end with you. And with that, that's going to do it for my thoughts and theories on Deltarune Chapter 1. Thank you everybody so much for checking this one out. This was one that I was really excited to make. These themes of inevitability versus agency, I think really does a lot to help reconcile in my head the conflict that the game kind of presents between whether or not your choices actually matter. So please feel free to let me know in the comments what you thought of my thoughts and theories. Again, please, no spoilers for any of the future chapters. I'm very much looking forward to starting Chapter 2 after this, to see if my theories hold any water. Please feel free to let me know what you thought of Chapter 1 and of my Let's Play so far. And yeah, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing, ringing the bell, all that good stuff. Links to my Discord, Ko-Fi, and Blue Sky are in the description below if any of those interest you. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.